Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We will start our IPv6 session for today. I'm Haitham Nakhal, a board member in Afrinic, as well as I am leading the Egyptian IPv6 task force. So since the depletion of IP version 4 in IANA pool in 2011, transition to IPv6 became inevitable. However, in our Afrinic region, we still have IP version 4 addresses to allocate to African network operators. But it's still important that we upgrade our networks to support dual stack routing to be ready for future. IPv6 or IP version 6 has a number of improvements and simplifications when we compare it to IP version 4. But I will leave these details for our distinguished presenters. And let me first introduce Mr. Hisham Ibrahim, IPv6 Program Manager in Afrinic. I know that it may be his last session as an Afrinic staff, so I consider this is a welfare session, and we'll leave the mic to Hisham to introduce our distinguished presenters and moderate the session. So floor is you, Hisham.
Thank you, Haitham, very much. So yes, as Haitham mentioned, IPv6 deployment in our region is very important. You may have heard that recently, both this year, both ARIN and LACNIC have both announced that they have reached their final blocks that they're giving out. LACNIC reached the final /9, which triggered the IANA process to give out whatever remaining space they have for IPv4, which was a /11 per RIR, which means that more and more globally, people are going to IPv6 because there basically is no IPv4. We have a panel of excellent speakers. You've obviously seen them at previous Afrinic meetings before. They have been working with IPv6 for years and years, but I'll leave them to share their own experiences. And I'd like to call for the first presenter, Andrew Olson, who is the group head of IP strategy at Liquid Networks, which is one of the major backbones here in Africa. So Andrew, please.
So, Mr. Andrew, before you start, please, I would like to set a point of order that we will make all Q&A after the three presentations. Is it okay? Okay, thank you.
Hi guys, firstly, thanks very much for having me. This is a fairly brief presentation, and I want to talk a little bit today about the challenges involved in deploying IPv6 and getting it out there. As I've said in the slide, IPv6 is critical, V4 is dwindling fast, maybe not as fast on this continent as elsewhere, but we need to promote V6, and in order to promote V6, it's my opinion that we need to be a lot more honest, potentially, than we have been with people who want to go out there and deploy V6. Because if you go out there and say IPv6 is the greatest thing since sliced bread, yeah, IPv6 is great, but there are challenges. And if you're not honest about those challenges, when somebody comes in there to deploy V6 and suddenly runs into problems, they go, wait a minute, I wasn't told about this, and they pull back, and their next door neighbors hear about this and they're not going to attempt to deploy it. Whereas if you've given people an honest appreciation of the fact that they may face challenges, they can work around those in their planning. And so I think that, yes, obviously V6 is coming. There's no question about it. It is critical to the future, but we have to be honest about the fact that there are challenges. And I want to talk a little bit about some of those challenges that we as Liquid have faced, and a little bit about how we've addressed some of those challenges. So the history with IPv6 at Liquid Telecommunications. We first looked at it in 2008 and we applied for our first V6 block in 2008 and did our initial deployment in 2009. But the next point on this slide is interesting because our first customer only came online in 2012, so there was a long gap there. And we still to this day do not have many customers that actually want V6, though we are ready for it. So deployment is a challenge. Actually getting people to use it once you've got it can be a bit of an issue. With regards to that first customer, by the way, my thanks to Mark Elkins for kicking and screaming at both us and that customer, and that's how that customer ended up with IPv6. We've currently got V6 deployed natively in South Africa, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Tanzania, London, and cross-border customers in Burundi that are actually running V6. When I say native, that's all the way down to the edge, that's across the backbone, that's everywhere. We also made a decision, which was the subject of much debate about a month ago, that we were going to run our V6 in single topology mode under AIS14. That did cause some issues, but it is in line with our stance that what we do with V4 we must do with V6. Later on in the presentation I'll also talk a little bit about why that may present some challenges in the future as well. That's a little bit of a picture of our network, our terrestrial fiber that we own. It's fully V6 enabled, it's one topology, and the V6 goes all the way to the edge. It is not just to the core. I've always taken exception over the years to providers going, yes, I've enabled my network for V6, and when you ask them, well, where's the V6? And they go, well, on my P routers. Unless the V6 is accessible to the clients, you're not V6 enabled. And I really take a strong stance on that, and I believe that if you want to claim that you're V6 ready, your customers have to be able to access it. Our strategy with regards to V6, we don't believe it's an optional or an add-on or anything special. It's just a normal part of the network. As such, we don't purchase hardware that is not V6 capable, not now, not ever. It's in our standard rollout procedures. If we give an engineer a rollout to do on a new node and we find that he's decided that V6 isn't really necessary and he's only done the V4 part, he's probably going to find himself in serious trouble because the network is designed such as they run completely together. That did create a lot of problems at the beginning, convincing engineers that this was not something that they had to do for fun. It was actually part of the standard rollout procedure, because the engineers were kind of looking at it going, okay, well, we'll do the V4 there, all the customers are working, and forgetting to do the V6 part. So it was a change in mentalities in the engineers that we had to drill this into them. Some engineers who were really pro V6, them not a problem, but your standard average engineer convincing him to go out and do this could be a little bit of a problem. When we are replacing and upgrading and rebuilding sections of the network, particularly sections which we've gained through acquisition, V6 always forms part of that thought process. If we acquire someone, the first thing we look at is how are we going to integrate this network into ours, and as such, how are we going to add V6 to it? And the moment a network is acquired, we look at how do we get V6 onto this as fast as humanly possible. Some basic challenges. First of all, the access networks are a major challenge. There's legacy hardware out there that is never ever going to see V6 in my opinion. Things like V6 platforms and legacy switching gear. Now, the VSAT platforms. Now, the problem with VSAT is that there are areas of this continent where fiber is still a long way from getting there. For example, it's really nice to bring fiber into Somalia. Unfortunately, if you bring fiber into Somalia at the moment, well, you'll have Al-Shabaab knocking on your door threatening to blow you up because they announced that internet was banned in Somalia. So satellite becomes your option to get in there. But because satellite is disappearing around the world, your V6 support for it is virtually non-existent, and I don't think it's ever going to be there because of the decrease in satellite. The protocol immaturity, there are still major parts of things that we can do in V4 that are still missing for V6, despite years and years and years of trying to convince the vendors to give them to us. We find that we can't do things like creating E-lines and E-pipes over V6 because there's a lack of LDP6. Your MPLS TE V6 is still not there. I know that there are people who are going to scream that MPLS TE is just a bad idea, go segment routing, etc. Well, segment routing isn't quite ready for production either, and the reality is in Africa we still need TE. So that is a problem. When we acquire large networks, there's often a massive scale to this. Getting V6 out there can take time. Customer adoption because of lack of resources can be slow, and also, unfortunately, some vendors still like to license V6 as optional extras and make you buy special licenses which can be quite expensive. Bizarre, but it's still there. So as I say, you can also divide these challenges into different types. The protocol immaturity, vendor bugs, that's a major one. Customer resistance to V6 and change. Human resources and skills to do V6 is a major problem. And migration of legacy networks when you're working in a single topology environment can be quite disruptive and quite problematic. Couple of specific examples. As I said, we made the decision to go single topology. To change now would be a major step backwards in our opinion, and it would require significant and extremely complex maintenance windows. Because if I change to multi-topology on one router, I'm going to break its AIS unless the router vendor supports transition mode. Transition mode is not supported in a lot of vendors. So I actually, now that I've gone down the route of single topology, can't really go backwards anyway. One of our vendors that was particularly used in one of our very large opcos only supports IP dampening on IPv4. This created an interesting situation in single topology mode. The link flaps, the interface gets dampened, ISIS is in single topology mode, the link comes back up, ISIS establishes because of the V6 in the single topology. It also puts the V4 over there, and your V6 starts working again. Unfortunately, you've just created a 4-minute black hole in your V4. So that's a situation where your V6 and deploying it can actually have an impact on your V4 network due to a vendor bug. We've approached the vendor a couple of times. They've told us to go multi-topology in there. We've said no. Eventually, that segment of the network with that vendor now runs in transition mode because the vendor supports it and allows us to stick with single topology on the rest of the network while we wait for the vendor to actually fix the problem. The same vendor, actually, we can't put V6 addresses on sub-interfaces, which means if we need to run VLANs, etc., we run them into the thing, into the router, then put trunking on that, and actually break the thing out into a direct interface, either via a switch or whatever, into a completely separate port. That's expensive and it burns ports, but it's one solution to a vendor that point blank refuses to support V6 on sub-ints, despite multiple requests over 2 years. The satellite platforms is hampered by lack of support on the VSAT terminals, likely to never be there. But where do we go from here? Of all of those issues, we've kind of found workarounds, but we're not stopping. We believe in V6. So we've invested very heavily to replace legacy hardware where the support is non-existent. It's come at a massive cost. We've invested almost $10 million in replacing hardware that was non-V6 compliant and in network upgrades recently. Admittedly, some of that was to get rid of legacy hardware we had to replace anyway because it wasn't functioning, but it's significant money. We want to get to a point where we actually are running V4 free on the edge network. We're in a position with the new metro designs and the new metro layouts we're doing, particularly in Kenya, to do this, provided that we get our LDP6 and the ability to run e-pipes and E-line services and all of the Metro Ethernet over MPLS type services on V6, we will be in a position to say no more V4 on the Metro edge. That will free up V4 resources that we can use elsewhere in the network where we are running desperately short, and allow us to avoid that day where I've got to go back to Afrinic asking for more V4 addresses and face more time delays again. So that is something that we're working towards, and we're looking to be in that position by late 2015, early 2016, if the vendors actually commit to their roadmaps and deliver what is in their roadmaps. To give you some conclusions, we don't view V6 as a revenue driver, but it's revenue protection. And that justifies our investment in making this happen. When V4 runs out anywhere in the world, I don't care if Africa has got V4 addresses that last us to 2030. At the end of the day, if the US and Europe run out of V4 and they go into a position where stuff starts appearing on the internet that is V6 only, my customers are going to be saying to me, I can't access that. And they're going to say, I'm going to a network that can. At that point, it's going to kill my revenues if I can't give them the same service. So to me, to protect my revenue and to mitigate risk, V6 and V6 readiness is absolutely critical. And that is something that justifies a lot of the investment. We also have a strict no-NAT policy. We believe in end-to-end communications, and so with regards to our V4 resources, we don't run NAT. And if we need more V4 to get rid of NAT, we will go and get it. Otherwise, we go V6 where we can, but we do not believe in NAT. The V6 networks, where it's V6 only, I think are a lot closer than people imagine. There are a lot of people who say to me, you're not going to start seeing V6 only networks for 5-10 years. I'm telling you that by early 2016, at the latest, if the vendors actually give us what they're promising in the roadmaps, our metro edges in particular will be V6 only networks. We'll still have to support V4 on our provider edge and our P routers, but anything where we can avoid doing layer 3 termination of customers and are just taking it as an MPLS transport layer back, that does not need V4 anymore, and we will scrap it. So those networks, those V6 only networks, are coming, and I think it's a lot closer than people imagine. While deployment is complicated and potentially expensive, we believe as Liquid it's going to stand us in very good stead going forward. We really believe that it will give us an edge over the competition if the competition doesn't wake up fairly soon. If I talk from a purely business perspective and a cynical perspective, if my competition doesn't wake up and I'm ready and their customers start running to me for V6, well, that's great. But on a more holistic view, I want my competitors out there running V6, and I'm willing to help them if they come and say, we've got a problem, how do we do this? We've always been willing to assist people in getting V6 ready. And so, yeah, that's just a little bit about what we faced, and I hope it was useful, and at the end of the session I'll take questions. Thanks very much.
Yeah. Thank you, Andrew, for this presentation. Now we will hear from Martin Levy, who is the network strategist for Cloudflare. Flare, sorry, I don't know what's wrong with me. He will give the perspective from CDN.
Well, good morning, nearly afternoon. Before I begin, I have to say it's so interesting to follow Andrew when speaking, because there's two things that he talked about, two things you should take away. One is he got to do the backbone talk, and having done that in my previous life, I'm very happy that somebody is still doing that. And second thing is you heard Andrew use the word holistic. Never heard him use that word before. Anyway, for those that don't know me, my name is Martin Levy. I joined Cloudflare earlier this year, and I now get to focus on something different. I still get to focus on V6, but I get to focus on the content delivery side as opposed to the middle. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about some ideas in this space, some of the things that we've done, and to a certain extent, just simply go through some what-if scenarios that may bridge the gap and help in the content side. Just a few simple sections, nothing you'd expect different. I want to introduce what Cloudflare does just a little bit, but more importantly, I want to go throw some stats up and talk about a particular segment of those stats, something that's not been as easy to see, I think, until now, but also show a mindset. So the beginning part is simply who's Cloudflare? And for those people that know about content delivery networks, we come about this slightly differently. The core part is to deal with the ability to move content around, the content delivery network section. However, we end up doing a lot more. And by doing DDoS mitigation, by running DNS as well, we try and provide people a more consistent and safe arena for their content. But what's that got to do with V6? Well, it turns out, as you look at the feature set, whether it be the access and control of the security, whether it be dealing with attacks, or whether it dealing with the way we do web optimization by bringing content from its origin, from where it begins, to the rest of the world, every aspect of that is V4, V6 equivalent. It does the same thing independent of protocol. Now, from a timeline point of view, this is a network that was ready back in 2011. It was one of the handful of networks and content plays that participated in World V6 Day, and then obviously 2 years ago in World V6 launch. So lots of experience with this, but you'll see where that experience goes, and you got to see it from the point of view of seeing it as agnostic to V4 and V6. Just like Andrew, you have to put a network map up on there. This, in this case, is a set of points of presence, and you'll notice that there's a continent missing here, and there is a reason why I'm here meeting with people. So, what does this problem really look like? And again, you're talking about this from the content point of view. I tried to come up with something. Owen DeLong from Hurricane Electric has used many different analogies between the size of V4, the size of V6. I decided that with the help of one of my colleagues, I'd come up with a different way, something a little bit more humorous maybe. But here you go. Two aviaries, a duck and a chicken, but they can't talk to each other. And that's the V4, V6 issue. Whether this is a good analogy, whether this is better or funnier than Owen, or whether my effort has fallen flat, that's okay. At least I got a picture of a duck and a chicken on the screen today. But the point is, these two protocols are different. And however you look at it, that has been the core issue that we've had since the beginning of this effort from the late 90s to 2000 out of the IETF. So, there are differences, but have there been successes? So here's two different measurements, both of which show success. They're measurements that are available either from Google's website or from the Internet Society's World IPv6 launch website. And the URLs are in the presentation. The presentation is uploaded. First of all, on the left-hand side here, you've got absolutely positive up and to the right V6 stats, more and more users using V6. So something is happening, and that usage has two key components, content and eyeballs. And yet, if you drill down, and I recommend having a look at this page, you can look at it on a per country basis, and you can see what's happening and where the various networks around the world that are being successful at getting their users to access content over V6. On the right-hand side, you've got the World IPv6 launch stats, which pull it apart on a carrier by carrier, a broadband by broadband provider. And in fact, actually, we have two players out of the United States, which, if we were to look 3 years ago, were nowhere stat-wise, and now are sitting at number 1 and number 2. The others there, this information does get updated on a regular basis. I would refer, obviously, to the Internet Society's web pages for more up-to-date information, although this was captured in the last couple of days. But the point is, these numbers have been increasing. But they've been increasing in areas where there's obviously an ease at getting the whole chain of V4 V6 connectivity and also V4 V6 content. So, those that know me know I always come up with a pretty positive mindset. We know IPv6 can be done. Shouldn't be up here saying that. But we obviously know that something is missing. Andrew's talked about it from the access network and that breadth and depth of getting bits all the way through a network through older hardware. But I'm going to start talking about this from the content side. And yes, we know networks need to catch up on all manner, at every geography, at every level. But let's focus on the content. We obviously know there's content out there. That's what World IPv6 launch and World IPv6 Day definitely gave us. But let's look at the numbers, and this is the simple number. If I look at the Alexa 1000, then I'm going to pull down these numbers again and discuss them a little further. If I look at the Alexa top 1000, then 13% of those web addresses actually show up as being accessible via V6, not just a Quad A record, but actually responding and giving content. But that number, if you look at that graph, it's actually been somewhat consistent for a while. It hasn't been growing at the level that it should be. So, what about everybody else? How can we look at that? How can we look at where this is, and why am I here talking about this? So the answer is that we have this ability to fix it. And if we take Andrew's mindset, if we look at some things are quite expensive or just don't warrant the expenditure. But content is slightly different. So run with me for a few slides here and let me see if I can pitch content delivery networks as the solution for this, as the gap. Because you can do that right now. So let's pretend someone asks me to say, tell me more, because I need the prompt and I will tell you anyway. So, if you look at content delivery networks provide this right-hand side of the diagram methodology, where you can take content that is V4 and bring it through a content delivery network where it is redistributed to the end user. But if the content delivery network is enabled for V6, then that content can be taken out of a V4 only site and brought into a V6 world. Content delivery networks inherently rely on multiple TCP segments, multiple sessions on the inside, collecting content, then distributing it internally, and then redistributing it finally to that end user wherever they are in the world. Obviously, they provide optimization, but a content delivery network that can run with V6 as its default, and there becomes the key point, can take nearly anything and deliver V6 where V4 was only available to begin with. Now, what we did at Cloudflare was rather interesting. We changed the user interface, the control panel, and we made that change back in March of this year to make the default v6 enabled. So the key point here is that any ordinary user coming along and turning up a service automatically gets v6. They don't ask for it. It's considered to be the default. And it turns out this is the absolute majority of users. In our particular case, it's actually millions of websites. And we've gone back and taken a very simple methodology of looking at years and years and years of customer signups. And if they had never visited this particular part of the internal customer portal, if they'd never gone and touched the V4, V6 switch, we touched it for them. Because we're standing on the shoulders of giants. We're standing on the amount of existing content and websites that have been enabled as part of the World v6 Day, World v6 launch, and beyond that capability. So when you've got millions of different domains on your system, you can go back, and in fact, you can't really turn that many on in a day. So we were turning on in the region of 10,000 URLs a day to enable v6. And then we added to that because that would still take us time, and we accelerated that. And sure enough, people noticed because the stats changed. People realized there were a lot more domains out there that were enabled for v6. This bottom screen capture is how the screen looks today when you just sign up for a service. By default, everything is there. Most people don't even go to that screen. Most people just use the service. Most people just realize that enabling v6 is part of the service, part of the internet. And this default is probably the biggest value to go out. And I'm going to reiterate one of the comments that Andrew made here, which is this issue of competition. I welcome my competition to do exactly the same thing. I welcome them to realize that this is the way the world should be. So let's look at some stats and see if we can actually roll this and see what goes on. So these are some fairly recent stats, looking again at using the Alexa list in various different ways. If we look at just the Alexa 100 list, it actually turns out really only one major website has got some form of CDN capability on it, but it's actually their own CDN. And when I say one, what I really mean is one family of websites, because of course some sites exist in the Alexa list from multiple countries or multiple styles. You may get a search engine and a video distribution, but they're all the same company. If we go look at the Alexa 1000 list, we get this fairly small percentage. I think it's about 13%, and I apologize for not having my notes right here with me. But if we then drill down into that orange area, the part that is the v6 aspect, and then look down at that at how many are using a CDN, we see quite a small percentage. And that means we have a lot of native v6 in there, but in fact we have a large amount of that Alexa 1000 that's still blue, that's still untouched in the v6 world. But this is just the Alexa 1000 numbers. Now go look at the Alexa 10,000 or go look at the Alexa million list, and you run through the processing, and you'll actually notice two things about the graphs. The basic v6 graph count is about equal. It's slightly smaller than 1,000, but it seems to settle down at a fixed percentage. But if you look at the CDN count definitely goes down as you look at that larger area. So there is enormous room for growth in the content play, and this is the content play that our heavy content delivery network users. This is where the content delivery enablement could really help in generating more content for that's v6 capable. Now, I love to pitch a rosy picture, but the reality is this. It doesn't solve all the problems. At no point should I ever be standing here saying, you can leave your legacy web server in v4 because this is how you solve your problem. No. At some point in time, inevitability is going to say that you're going to go v6 native on and dual stacked on your existing origin servers, on your environment that's delivering web pages today, independent of whether you're using a content delivery network. But this could be the appropriate stepping stone, and independent again of which CDN you use, but it is a useful step to provide confidence, to live with the masses that also do this, and realize that enabling a site for v6 is actually a very safe thing to do. There's obviously still a lot more work to do, and in fact, I'm really going to skip this because I'm repeating what has already been said here, which is there's still a lot of work to be done. For all the years that I and many others have sat at microphones and talked about the importance of v6, we still have a long way to go, but we are much further along than we are. The closing comments are everybody needs to play their part. Every part of it. I've talked about the middle part, about content delivery networks. Previously we heard about access. This all plays together. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. And I appreciate the time, and keep in mind, right now, this is the time for v6. Thank you.